first thing I'll do is get the heck away from the trap door. So much for using the podium this morning. It's great to be back in New Mexico. As Pat said, I came from that wayward school up I-25 where I got my bachelor's degree and met my bride a little over 30 years ago. And so as we look at the first slide, you might ask, what on earth does R3 have to do with new regulatory environment, new implementation, and new execution? Well, for me, it's kind of like reading, writing, and arithmetic. So they all start with an R in one way, shape, or form. But it's actually right regulations, right scope, right time, and I would actually add a fourth R, and that's a responsive regulatory environment. So my job this morning is kicking off this conference, is to try to make a discussion about regulations in a regulatory environment somewhat interesting. And it's not lost on me that I probably have three types of people in the crowd this morning. First group probably enjoyed the reception last night a little too much. Second group, like me, probably has not had enough coffee this morning. The third group is the group I'm really worried about, and that's the group that fits in both of those first two groups. So my job is to talk, your job is to listen, and hopefully we finish at just about the same time. So what I'd like to talk to you about this morning is the regulatory environment we're in, the regulatory environment we're moving to, and why this is important. I think everybody understands it's an exciting time to be in this business. But it's also a difficult time to be in this business. Our cadence for launch is going through the roof, and that is combined with an increase in the complexity on how we are getting to space. You put those two together, and it makes it very difficult from a regulator's perspective to keep up. So this is what we've looked like on commercially licensed launch and reentries over about the last decade and where we're going. And disregarding the peaks and valleys, we are absolutely on a glide slope with a suggestion that it's not going to change. Once we get really deep into spaceflight participants and flying people other than crew in space, this is going to go up again. And I'm going to talk a little bit as we get further into this on what we're doing as a regulatory agency to keep up with that and also remain a data-driven regulatory agency. We are seeing things now in our industry that we only dreamed of a decade ago. And quite frankly, a decade ago, most people would tell you some of these things just were not going to happen or just would not happen. We have to create a regulatory environment that allows us to protect the public, but also allows for innovation and speed in this industry so that we can maintain the United States' global leadership. And two that I don't have on here that I'm still struggling with on how we're going to regulate or should we regulate, one is relativity. Being able to do additive manufacturing and potentially change the size of their rocket between missions. How do you regulate that? Or spin launch. Should spin launch be regulated? Probably, but how? How do you do that? How do you keep up? How do we create a regulatory construct that allows industry to go fast and keeps the public safe? So, recognizing this, the administration put out Space Policy Directive 2, understanding that our current regulations, whether prescriptive or semi-performance-based, would not keep up to where the industry was going. So we were directed to streamline, combine regulations, move away from a prescriptive approach to a performance-based approach, allow for innovation, The problem with that is, how do we regulate to that? On one side, you have our current reentry or reusable rules that, quite frankly, are very tough for companies to navigate through because we won't even tell you that you have to bring us a rock, let alone what color the rock is, as you try to satisfy our safety requirements. On the other side, we have a one-size-fits-all prescriptive approach. And so this is trying to, or attempting to, bring all those together. Two things that are constant, though. Number one, foundation is public safety. As much as I like everybody in this business, it is not my regulatory responsibility to protect folks from inherently dangerous operations if you're involved in those operations. My office has licensed over 300 launches since its inception. We have not had a single injury, a single fatality in that entire time to the general public. The other thing that's not lost on me is that we have a statutory requirement to only regulate to the extent necessary. So it's quite a balancing act. So, Space Policy Directive comes out. The team at AST did a phenomenal job taking a process that normally runs 3 to 5 years and did it in about 8 months, 8 to 10 months, which was getting a proposed rule out. Proposed rule means draft rule. Now, the front end was truncated, so as you might imagine, the product was just this side of perfect. We released it on April 15th on tax day and did a 126-day comment period. Started off with 75, did 2 extensions. Industry asked for more time, so we actually went over what we would normally do, 126 days. And we got some great comments, and I'll talk about those comments here in a little bit. And the comments, as you can imagine, went the entire spectrum. Over here on the right side, entire rule was redlined. So in, out. This is where we think you missed the mark. This is where it could be better. On the far left, this is terrible. You suck. Not quite as helpful as the comments we received on the right side. So once we started getting substantive comments in, it's actually very helpful and is going to help us get to a performance-based rule that we can actually regulate to and allows the industry to innovate. This is sausage making. This industry is not homogeneous. Some folks want us to go left, some want us to go right, some want a stop sign, some want a yield sign, some want a traffic signal. No one likes to be slowed down. And the analogy I'll use is traffic signs. So you come to a 4-way stop, and there's a couple of things you can do. One is get on this left side. One is no signs, no nothing. We just trust everybody to do the right thing. On the other end is 4-way stop. Now, depending on where you live, one might be appropriate or one might be more appropriate than the other. But we have choices. Maybe we use 2 stop signs. Maybe we use a yield sign. Maybe we use a traffic signal. Maybe we use a traffic circle. But what I do know is if you have nothing, it's going to be not only hard to regulate, but as you know, just from driving, not everybody does the right thing all the time. So there's got to be some regulatory environment to protect the public. The other side of that is too much regulation, and then folks tend to ignore the regulation, or it is not just not additive to public safety, it is actually a detriment to public safety. Getting that balance exactly right is difficult, which is why we have the comment period, and now we are in the middle of categorizing all of the comments we received, summarizing and analyzing. As a matter of fact, yesterday morning I had a 2-hour telecon on the rulemaking with my team. I'll do the exact same thing tomorrow. 3 days a week, we have 2 to 3 hour meetings on every single portion of this rule as we attempt to get it right. or as we worked to get it right. So not only did we have over 150 comment submissions, we had over 100 clarifying questions because, quite frankly, we truncated that front part, and so there was a lot of concern within industry that we had not moved forward enough on the performance-based part. One of the things we are doing to get performance-based is using what we call advisory circulars, which is common in the FAA. And advisory circulars can either be guidance or a way to meet a requirement. Now, in a perfect world, all of these advisory circulars would have been out for industry to comment on. We've got one out. We know we need about 23 right now. We believe it's at least 24, may go a little bit higher as we move stuff from the rule into an advisory circular. What we do while we are attempting to get those out, when the rule is delivered, we know we need 6 of them have to be delivered with the rule because it'll be the only means of compliance with the new regulation. We are expending approximately, at any given time, about 20% of my workforce is working on the rule and about 10% of my budget. I just doubled the contract on this to get these advisory circulars out because it's important. And as the acting Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Steve Bradbury, announced at the last Space Council, National Space Council meeting, our goal is to get this out fall of next year. Then what? We still got a lot of work to do. We need to redo Part 401, which are definitions, spaceports, so that we can regulate and support great operations like Spaceport America, where I spent yesterday, Part 437, which is our experimental permitting, and 440, which is the insurance. This is probably going to be about a decade-long journey to get all of these done. But they've got to be done to be able to support where this industry is going. Now, I showed you this, and I talked a little bit about how we've got to change, and it's not just from the regulatory perspective, it's also an internal perspective. So one way to look at this is how many people notionally we have available to us to work an individual license. Well, you look over the course of the last 10 years, and this is what it looks like. You go back 7 years ago, and you've got 10, 15, 20 people notionally in your office for each license activity. We're down now to about 2. So while our workload has increased about tenfold, our staff has increased about 40%. And I'm actually down about 15% right now as we try to hire folks. So something has to change. We have to get more folks, and quite frankly, we have to reorganize as well, so that we have a laser focus on those things that are absolutely critical to our core mission: safety, licensing, permitting, encouraging, facilitating, promoting. If it doesn't add value to those things, then we don't do it anymore. As we reorganize, and the Secretary of Transportation directed us to reorganize by the end of this year, we're basically going to bifurcate the organization. One half will be on operations. For us, operations, licensing, permitting, flight safety analysis, system safety analysis, compliance. Those are the things that if something goes wrong today, either somebody gets hurt or you can't fly. On the other side will be all of our policy, our new regulations, stakeholder outreach, global outreach. We also have to get the right folks in. So on the organizational side, we have a Lean Six Sigma effort going on to look at every single process that we have and make sure it's efficient, effective, and necessary. And on the people side, we're doing a skills assessment to make sure we have the right skills. I have a propulsion engineer that worked on the Apollo program. At some point, he will retire, and I have nobody behind him right now. So we have to fix that. We can't just hire somebody and train them and hope that we're going to get the right person. You can do that occasionally, but some of the skills that we need are very refined, defined, specific skills that we need going forward in this new regulatory construct. So sometimes you have to hire folks that it's not intuitively obvious they're the right person to hire. But if you need somebody who can drill a hole, you may not want an electrical engineer. We've got to look at that as we move forward and build our team based on the new regulatory environment. This team has been phenomenal, done a tremendous job over the course of the last 3 decades. If we are to maintain that level, we've got to change to be able to support over the next 3 decades. We are absolutely in an exciting time. There are new concepts, there are new things, there are folks in this business we'd have never thought of just a few years ago. But it's not just about the hardware. In my 3 decades in this business, I have never seen a focus or a concerted focus from the White House, through the Congress, through the departments, down through the American people. This is exciting, but this is what it's about. Where's Beth? There's Beth. There's my favorite astronaut. So I was actually honored, or had the privilege of awarding Beth Moses, her commercial astronaut wings earlier this year, back in April. This is what this is about. Now, Beth is also unique. You only get a chance to be the first once. Beth was a three-peater, so an overachiever. Beth was our first non-crew, or non-pilot crew member on a commercial flight, a commercial space flight. She was also the first person to unbuckle in suborbital flight, and the very first female to receive commercial astronaut wings. So since our wings are... Since our wings are currently numbered, it only made sense to award Beth 007. But we are doing things, as I said, that people did not believe could happen. And there's still naysayers out there. I was at the Cape for our first flyback. Folks were concerned that we had made the wrong call allowing SpaceX to fly back to the Cape. It was exactly the right call for this industry. But it turns out that this is tough. It is absolutely a tough business. It's a tough business to get into. It's a tough business to stay into. And it's a tough business to be successful in. That bottom left one occurred on my watch, AMO 6, 19 milliseconds, everything perfect, everything gone. But what I will tell you, all 4 of these very bad days, these catastrophic anomalies, what they all have in common, not a single member of the public was injured or killed. That's what we do. But when everything goes right, it's a mini miracle. This is what we are regulating to keep the public, or this is why we're regulating to keep the public safe, and how we are allowing innovation as we go forward. Thank you very much for your time. Got to make sure the trap door's not open yet.
Yes, well, I want to congratulate you. Generally, you follow directions well. And
I've been married a long time.
Yes, that helps, right? So we have a few questions here. Again, folks, if you want to ask a question, you've got to log on to the social media website. And here we go. Do you expect to publish a supplemental or a revised proposed rule before the final rule comes out, or are you going to go straight to the final rule next?
That depends. That depends on the scope of the changes that may need to occur in the rule. The way a supplemental works is if we discover that there is enough of the proposed rule, there's a material change, or there are enough things that are flawed with the rule that we essentially need to start over, we put a high-speed hold on, and we do a supplemental. We re-engage industry, saying, you know, we couldn't get there. We're going to have to try this again. The alternative to that is we believe there is enough of the new rule that will be effective and can help industry and help us regulate. So therefore, we can go forward with that and then do a reset on those things that still need work. So it depends.
Very good. You mentioned earlier in your talk spin launch, and there may be some people who are not familiar with spin launch. Would you mind, A, talking a little bit about what that is, and then how much the FAA has looked into it?
So spin launch has got a unique concept in that they will use a centrifuge in a vacuum to get a payload up to escape velocity and launch into space at some point non-propulsively. And so the trick becomes, should you regulate an activity like that? And if you should, at what point? Is it, say, above 150 kilometers? Is it when potentially the public is endangered? We have just started really looking at that because our current regulations don't account for that. Our current regulations are based on propulsive capability. And so if you're launching something with no propulsive capability, at least initially, what do we do as regulators to keep the public safe? And like I said, it may be nothing. And just stand aside and let them do their thing. So we've got work to do on that. But it's an incredible concept.
Thank you. Part of the role of the AST in legislation is to encourage and facilitate the commercial spaceflight industry.
And promote.
And promote, very good. It seems like we hear a lot of talk about the regulatory part of the role of the AST, but can you talk about what you're doing to encourage and facilitate and promote commercial spaceflight?
So to start off with, I believe the best way to do what we call EFP, the best way to do EFP is with the right regulatory environment. If you have the right regulatory environment, it allows industry to innovate and go fast while still maintaining public safety. So I believe the foundation has to be the right regulatory construct. As far as facilitating, so for me, facilitating means doing our best to meet an individual company's timelines. Now, you can have something set in stone saying, okay, you have to deliver this piece of paper to us at T-minus 60 days. If you deliver it at T-minus 59 days, sorry, we're not going to get to you, or you're going to put your launch date at risk. When in reality, it may only take us 5 or 6 days to actually do the analysis, but our rule says 60 days. So we are working very hard, nights and weekends sometimes, depending on the stakeholder, to actually allow us to turn the regulatory machine quickly enough so that we can allow those activities to take place while still protecting the public.
Very good, and I think we got time for one more. The rules that you're looking for are performance-based. We'd like the questioner would like to understand that a little bit better because in looking through the NPRM rules, many of the proposed rules seem to be very prescriptive. So tell us what you're looking for in terms of performance-based versus prescriptive rules.
So in some cases, it comes down to you say tomato, I say tomato. Two different teams will look at the same section of the rule and come up with completely different opinions of whether or not that section of the rule is performance-based or too prescriptive. Essentially, if we can go with a performance-based construct, we will go down that path. We will tell you what needs to be done, not how to do it. If we can't, there's going to be some prescriptive. And interestingly, there are some sections where there was pretty much consensus across the industry that we weren't prescriptive enough, like with incremental submissions. If I submit this part, how much time do I have, and how does it affect my 180-day timeline? That's a hard thing to do, and that's going to have to be done on case by case. Also, I remember I mentioned right up front that we truncated the first part of the development of this rule. Based on that, one of the things we had to do, again, trying to preserve the schedule long-term, was if we had a thought at all that something should be in the rule, it went into the rule. Sometimes those things were far more prescriptive than we would have liked, but it is easier from a regulatory construct and a rulemaking construct to take something out of the rule and still maintain schedule than put it in, knowing that you are probably going to drive yourself into a supplemental before you even get started. So there are sections of the current proposed rule that are more prescriptive than I would like to see. And that's why we are doing 3, right now, probably going to 4 days a week, what we call regulatory review boards, where we go through every single section. How can we make this more performance-based and still protect the public?
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Let's have a round of applause for the Associate Administrator. Thank you for being here.